My sister, Lara, was the family's punctual, who arrived 5 minutes earlier and thought she was late. We lived in the same building, different floors, noisy and damp city. That Tuesday morning, 7:48 a.m., smell of coffee and thin rain in the railing. She knocked on my door to order the lucky umbrella red all-pen. "New interview. I go back to 2, he said, smiling the way he filled the kitchen. I always admired Lara's determination. She was the compass of our family, always pointing north with accuracy that I could never match. When she left, I felt the emptiness left by her presence, but I comforted myself with the idea that she would see her in a few hours, full of stories about the interview and her grandiose plans. At 2:10 p.m., time seemed to have slowed down. Each tic-tac of the clock on the wall sounded like a hammer in my patience. I called Lara, just to hear the phone ring until it fell into the mailbox. I tried again, and again. At 3 p.m., despair began to settle in, the cell phone out of the area. The automated voice repeated his cold sentence as my heart pulsed rapidly, unzipped. Around 5 p.m., anxiety had already taken over me completely. I went to the police station, imagining that as soon as I crossed the door, Lara would appear out of nowhere, laughing at my exaggerated concern. They asked to wait. Maybe she just was late, they said, with a calm that seemed cruel to me. I knew this was not the case. Lara was never delayed. At 9 p.m., the city outside seemed indifferent to my anguish. The lights of the cars passing, the people running to shelter from the intensified rain, all contrasted with the storm that formed inside me. It was as if the world followed its normal course while mine was on suspended, trapped in an unbearable weight. Every minute that passed without news was a new stab of fear. I no longer breathed well. The air looked thick, almost solid, and every inspiration was a lost battle. I go back to both, she had said, and I clung to this phrase like a castaway to a piece of wood while night slowly advanced. The apartment was dark, except for the lamplight that cast long shadows and distorted by the walls. I sat on the floor, phone in hand, waiting for a miracle. With every notification that was not hers, my heart sank a little more. The clock, my executioner, followed relentless, and I fought the sense of powerlessness I threatened to swallow me. The smell of coffee that morning was still hung in the air, a cruel souvenir of a day that had begun with hope and now turned into a nightmare. I wondered where she could be, what would have happened. Each thought was a new torture, a new possibility that I didn't want to consider, but I couldn't avoid. The city, oblivious to my suffering, followed its pace, but for me, everything was suspended. I could only wait, grabbing the hope that soon that door would open and Lara would come in, perhaps soaked by the rain, but safe. I didn't have much beyond hope, and at that moment, it was all that I was left. The next day dawned with a gray sky, reflecting the uncertainty and despair that eroded my inside. The silence of the apartment contrasted with the cacophony of unanswered questions that hammered my mind. At the police station, the investigation into Lara's disappearance was beginning to take shape, but it was like setting up a puzzle with missing pieces. Security cameras' images were the first concrete track. The video showed Lara coming out of the subway, her steps firm and determined as always, although they carried unusual haste. She stopped in a bank, bought a bottle of water, and then entered a bus. It was not the usual route for their job interviews. This made me rest, as if I had scratched the surface of something deeper and more dark. The interview she had mentioned was just an empty echo. A call to the office confirmed that she never arrived. The receptionist, kind but oblivious to our torment, just reiterated the obvious. Lara didn't appear. The feeling of something out of place grew, a tide of anxiety that threatened to drown me. In the corner's convenience store, another camera recorded Lara at 10:10, but the image froze, as if time had stopped. It was a detail that the police scored, but without more information, they went on. Impotence grew within me, like a silent disease. What could have happened in that time space between the store and what came next? At 10:12, a Uber was requested from Lara's cell phone. The order was canceled 2 minutes later. The driver, when contacted, said the passenger never appeared at the meeting point. Every detail seemed normal, but there was a disconnection, an imperceptible rupture that left everything out of focus. I was every second of this information, trying to find some logic, a clue that could guide me to her. But it was like trying to rebuild a puzzle with pieces that refused to fit in. Lara was methodical, organized, someone who planned every step accurately. None of this made sense. Deep down my heart, subtle anxiety began to turn into something darker. The city outside continued its relentless pace, indifferent to my pain. People passed, the cars honked, and I remained there, surrounded by a loneliness that choked me. Every detail that emerged brought with it a new wave of fear. Where could she be now? Lara's image, lost somewhere unknown, haunted me. Every minute that passed without news was like a silent scream in the void. The lack of answers began to erode my hope, but I still refused to give up. Lara was more than my sister. She was part of me, and I knew that somehow I would need to find it, even if it meant diving into the shadows of a mystery that threatened to swallow us. That night, lying in bed, sleep was not coming. Silence was absolute, broken only by the distant sound of the city that never slept. I closed my eyes, trying to remember Lara's smile, the sound of her laugh, the security that her presence always brought me. It was all I had, and I clung to these memories like an anchor. When the next morning brought the pale light of the dawn, I was determined to continue. Lara was somewhere, and I wouldn't rest until she found her. The day that bent was just started, but I was ready to face what I came to, determined to bring my sister back. At 22:07, I climbed to my apartment, the steps echoing heavy through the corridor. The feeling that the world around me was still spinning, while my own was collapsing, suffocating me. The bag of cold bread that I carried seemed a cruel reminder of a normality that I no longer recognized. Each passing floor approached me to an uncertain destination, where the shadows seemed to lengthen and merge with the darkness of my heart. At 10:08 p.m., the door ranged when opening itself. The familiar sound, which had so often welcomed me with tacit relief, now made me shudder. Nothing looked right, and the air was loaded with a tension that clung to my skin like static electricity. I let out the bag on the kitchen table, the lost look in the shadows that stretched down the walls, as if there were secrets there, waiting to reveal themselves. At 22:09, my cell phone, forgotten on the bench, suddenly lit the screen. The bluish light cut the dim light like a razor, and my heart jumped in response, a deaf beat that echoed in the void of silence. I ran my hand over him, the trembling fingers hesitating for a moment before touching him. Every second extended in suffocating eternity. 22:10. An SMS entered, dry and straightforward. Do not light the light. Take off your shoes. Back through the corridor. The message was a silent scream in the chaos that unfolded inside me. Lara has always been straightforward, but never enigmatic. I stayed there, looking at the screen, trying to decipher the words like a foreign language. Below, like a puzzle to be resolved, a sequence, 37B. My body froze, a shiver crossing my spine like an ancestral warning. What did that mean? Why was the message so urgently loaded? The air around me was standing, loaded with a metallic smell of dust and something else, something I couldn't identify, but it made me swallow hard. It seemed that the time itself had frozen, suspending itself in a moment of unbearable tension. Carefully, I took off my shoes, bare feet touching the cold and immobile floor. The sound of my breathing was an almost deafening noise in the absolute silence. The heart beat fast, like a war drum announcing something to come. Retread by the corridor, every step measured, feeling the floor shake lightly under the weight of the unknown. Inside the door, a brief noise, breathing. Someone was there. My heart stopped for a moment, then fired, each beat a thunder inside my chest. Adrenaline was a sweet poison that ran through my veins, instigating me to run, to fight, to survive. But I couldn't move. I was stuck at that moment, between fear and hope. I knew I needed to act, but fear froze in my muscles, making each movement a Herculean effort. The presence on the other side of the door was palpable, an entity that seemed to observe, waiting. My instinct shouted for me to run away, but something deeper, something primal, told me that this was the key, that there was the answer I was looking for so much. The corridor seemed to extend infinitely, a passage to an uncertain destination. The tension was almost tangible, a rope about to break. I took a deep breath. I am keeping calm, thinking clearly. I knew Lara was trying to tell me something, that this message was more than a warning. It was a call, a last resort, a hope. With every careful step, I approached the door, the cold wood under my fingers as I pressed my ear against it. The sound of breathing on the other side was smooth, almost imperceptible, but undeniably human. Who was there? What did you want from me? From Lara? And most importantly, how did all this connect to that enigmatic sequence? 37B. It was time to find out. I knew I needed to have courage. I needed to face whatever was beyond that door. Not for me, but by Lara. She was somewhere, waiting, trusting that I would follow the instructions, that would find the way. And at that moment, I knew I wasn't alone. Lara was with me, in every beat of my heart, in every hesitant breath. The tremendous hand. I reached the doorknob, ready to rotate it, to open the door, and face whatever was waiting. It was time to unravel the mystery, to confront the unknown, and finally bring Lara back home. I didn't know what I would find, but I was ready to find out. Darkness no longer scared me. It was just the prelude of light that, I was sure, was about to reveal. The decision not to light the light was instinctive, a visceral reaction to the urgent warning contained in Lara's message. Her words echoed in my mind as I cautiously descended the bit of stairs, the stuffed steps in the worn carpet. Each step that left behind was one less burden, but it also approached the unknown, what I feared. Downstairs, I knocked on the door of my neighbor, Mr. Almeida, a bald man with an easy smile, who never failed to offer a cup of coffee when we crossed. When he opened the door, his eyes reflected surprise and concern to see my expression. I didn't need to say much. "Something happened," I muttered, and he immediately understood the severity of the situation. Without hesitation, he took the phone and with firm fingers dialed to the police. We waited in his room, time extending like a rope about to break. The tension was almost tangible, an invisible presence that filled the space between us. The television on low volume seemed distant, a background noise in a world that was no longer meaningful. Mr. Almeida tried to distract me with trivial conversations about time, but I barely listened to his words, lost in a whirlwind of thoughts and concerns. When the police arrived, the relief was immediate, but not total. There was something disturbing to know that the danger was so close that I had almost fallen into such a meticulously planned trap. The agents moved with the efficiency of those who have seen many crime scenes, their flashlights cutting the darkness with light-boned lights. Upon entering my apartment, the feeling of strangeness increased. It was as if the space was violated, the familiarity suddenly transformed into hostile ground. Everything seemed too organized, the objects carefully placed in their places, but in a way that was not natural. The absence of disorder was, by itself, a sign that something was terribly wrong. The room lamp, I found out, was disqualified just enough not to light, an almost imperceptible calculated movement that spoke of a methodical and cold mind. The expert, a man with a close eye and accurate gestures, pointed to the footer. There, the still fresh glass dust was glowed under the flashlight, a silent evidence of a recent break. A line of nylon, almost invisible in the dark, was attached to the door frame, ready to be pulled to the smallest touch of the switch. The scene was drawn before me with painful clarity. Whoever was behind it had my automatic reaction, the reflection of lighting the light when entering. It was a simple but devastating plan in its effectiveness. The light would stand out, a perfect target for anyone hidden in the shadows, waiting for their moment. Lara's SMS, with their enigmatic instructions, had been my salvation. Without him, without his silent warning, I would have succumbed to a destination that now refused to imagine. I was safe, but the reality of how close I had been in danger left me without breath. Gratitude mixed with a fear residue that would not abandon me anytime soon. The police completed the inspection, their serious expressions reflecting the severity of the situation. They assured me that a vigilante would remain in the building, but it did not erase the dread that was now moving in my chest. The question that didn't shut up was, who, besides Lara, did you know so much about me? And why did I become a target? Back at Mr. Almeida's apartment, sitting on his worn brown couch, I felt a wave of determination growing. Lara Milavara, but was still in danger. I needed to find her, needed to unravel the mystery that surrounded us, before it was too late. Fear was still there, a persistent shadow, but hope and determination were now stronger. While the night deepened outside, a silent promise formed inside me. I would not rest until Lara was safe, and now, with a new sense of urgency, he was more determined than ever facing whatever he came to face the shadows they threatened to swallow us. I was no longer alone. Lara's warning had given me not only protection but also a direction, and I would follow this way, as dark as it was, until I find the light. The 37B sequence reverberated in my mind like an insistent echo, an enigmatic track that needed to be unraveled. Lara has always been the master of details, and I knew that code was not a simple chance. In our building, correspondence cabinets were identified by numbers and letters. With a renewed determination, I went down to the ground floor, where the 37B mailbox was located. I opened the metal hatch, just to find a disappointing emptiness that reflected the sense of impotence that consumed me. I took a deep breath, refusing to give up. Lara's logic was impeccable. If I wasn't there, I needed to look elsewhere. The next step took me to the underground garage, where the shadows danced under weak lighting, creating a scenario of almost cinematic suspense. The parking spaces, numerical and devoid of mystery, contrast with the deposits. Metal cages, identified by combinations of numbers and letters, kept invisible secrets. The 37B deposit caught my attention immediately. He belonged to a resident who had passed away for some time, and the place has been sealed since then. The metal door displayed 3 risks of red pen, identical to those who decorated Lara's umbrella. The heart hit faster, a silent confirmation that it was on the right track. With the help of the liquidator and the cautious presence of the police, we were able to open the warehouse. Inside, the space was tight and smelled of rust and abandonment. The view of the motorcycle helmet with the cracked visor and a cheap jacket hanging me shudder. They were such disparate items, but together they told a history of movement, of hasty matches. However, it was the little pen drive wrapped in tape that captured my attention, pulsing with promises of revelation. Back in Mr. Almeida's apartment, I inserted the pen drive into his laptop with trembling hands. The only file contained there was a video, recorded in the previous dawn. I squeezed play, and the Lara figure filled the screen. She was sitting somewhere unknown, the evident tension on her face. If you are seeing this, I failed to cancel the scheduled shipping. His voice was firm, but he carried an urgency that he hooked on his throat. Do not light the light. They first watch the light. Search for 37B. The image froze for a moment, capturing the intensity in his eyes. She was guiding me from beyond the abyss of uncertainty, delivering clues like crumbs on a dark path. The pain of not knowing where she was suffocating, but every word of her was a spark of hope, illuminating the path I still needed to walk. The video continued, and Lara revealed fragments of a plan that I didn't fully understand, but now she knew how to be crucial. She mentioned names, places, a network of conspiracies that seemed as intricate as he was dangerous. They know I'm close, she said, her eyes flashing to the camera with a determination I recognized. But you are too. I trust you to finish what I started. Tears ran down my face without permission, an involuntary response to the courage she displayed. I wanted to hug her, to say that everything would look good, but all that was left was that recording, a message of bravery and love. When the video ended, the room was silent, except for the distant sound of the city's traffic. Mr. Almeida, who had watched in silence beside me, put his hand on my shoulder, a gesture of solidarity that warmed the coldness of the moment. You'll find her, he said, the voice full of a certainty that I desperately wanted to share. And I knew he was right. Lara had given me the tools I needed. Now it was up to me to use them. With the pen drive safe in my hands and Lara's image recorded in my mind, I got up. There was a fight ahead, a path that needed to be carried with care and courage. Lara was out there, and I wouldn't rest until she brought her back. He knew that each step approached her, and the determination burned in my chest like a lighthouse, guiding me through the shadows. The atmosphere at the police station was loaded with a tense stillness, while Delegate Mora explained the mechanism of automatic SM sending S. Her words floated in the air, echoing the anguish I could barely contain. The idea that Lara had scheduled the message as a last feature, a line of defense against what seemed to be an inevitable destination, was both distressing and revealing. She was careful, said Mora, her fixed eyes on mine, trying to convey confidence. This type of application is used for reminders, but it can also be a salvation board, a scream in the dark, if you know how to use it. Lara's words in the video resonated in my mind, every syllable impregnated with a purpose that only now I was beginning to understand. There are people disappearing in the same time curve. 1010 appears everywhere. It was as if she was designing an invisible map, an unarmed, sized pattern, but for her was as clear as the day. The list of signs found on the helmet, now carefully dry and extended on the table, was a crucial fragment of this puzzle. 3 combinations of letters and numbers noted with the accuracy of who knows that in every detail lies the difference between life and death. The underlined bus routes were like veins in a larger body, connecting points that needed to be investigated. The delegate ran a hand over his chin, his eyes lost for a moment in the papers. These cars can be the key. If they are connected to the disappearances, we need to locate them. The old garage mentioned is a starting point. The mention of the old garage made my heart accelerate. It was a place that I knew well, a deactivated building on the boundaries of the city, where the shadows lengthened lazily on the afternoons. Lara and I used to pass by when we were children, pretending to be an abandoned castle or a secret spy base. At the time, it was a place of adventures and laughs. Now it seemed to have become a domain of mystery and danger. Delegate Mora signaled one of the police, who immediately left to start investigating the signs. I observed his actions, a little calmer now that a plan was beginning to take shape. But the sense of urgency was relentless, a drum beating my mind, remembering the time that passed relentless. "I go with you," I said, knowing that my presence was not just a choice, but a necessity. Lara had trusted me to follow her clues, and I couldn't disappoint her. Mora nodded, comprising the bond that united us, transcendent and unqualified. On the way to the garage, the city seemed to unfold like a slow-motion movie. The lights of the posts passed as lightning, reflecting fragments of hope in the windows of the car. My heart beat the rhythm of the tires over the asphalt, each pulse a silent promise that I was coming closer to Lara. When we arrived, the old garage rose before us, an imposing structure that now seemed to keep dark secrets. The faded walls and the broken windows were testimonials of a time past, but what hid inside was a mystery to unravel. With the lanterns in hand, we advanced in silence, each step echoing in the vastness of the abandoned space. The air was impregnated with dust and something else, an electrical tension that made my skin tingling. The shadows seemed to whisper, carrying fragments of unlisted stories. Inside, we find a row of canvas, covered cars, their real silhouettes as guardians of an old secret. The lantern's light danced on them, revealing the signs that corresponded to the Lara list. My heart jumped, a jump of hope and fear. Mora approached one of the cars, pulling the canvas carefully. The vehicle was empty, but the trunk revealed something more: papers, documents, a web of information that certainly led to something bigger. Each document was a wire, intertwined in a network of conspiracies that I was barely beginning to understand. The feeling that Lara was close, that each track was inexorably led us to her, was overwhelming. Hope, fueled by each discovery, was a brilliant lighthouse in darkness. However, the constant presence of danger was a sharp memory that time was against us. While the police analyzed the documents, I felt a firm hand on my shoulder. Mora was by my side, her eyes full of a determination that mirrored mine. "We will find her," he promised, and I knew that together, we would face whatever was to come. The search for Lara continued, and with each track, with each step, I felt that we approached the heart of this mystery. Her courage, her intelligence and determination were the light that guided us through the shadows, and as long as there was a way to follow, I would not rest until it was safe at home. The old garage rose like a forgotten monolith, an iron shadow and concrete, guard the secrets under the cloak of the night. The air was dense, loaded with moisture and mystery, while the delegate Mora and her team moved with the accuracy of a silent ballet, setting the siege with calculated discretion. The distant sound of a drip rhythmic the environment, a natural metronomer in the midst of the growing tension. At 22:10, a point of light appeared at the entrance. A white car slid down the alley. The headlights briefly cut off the darkness before they went out, turning the vehicle into a shadow between shadows. The silence was almost absolute, broken only by the thin sprout that emerged from the car radio, a familiar sound that brought a shiver to my spine. It was the same wheezing of Lara's video, a sound signature that was now a painful reminder of her absence. Delegate Mora made a subtle gesture, indicating to wait. The expectation was almost palpable, a rope straightened to break. My heart beat hard, a drum inside my chest as we watched the scene unfold. The man got out of the car, his features hidden in the shadows, the recognizable jacket, the same one he saw in the video. He moved with a contained confidence, as if he had done that countless times. The trunk portal rose, revealing boxes that he removed quickly in familiarity. The flash of a metallic reflection made me advance instinctively, 2 hasty steps before feeling Mora's firm hand on my arm, holding me in place. My voice escaped in an involuntary call, a supplication that cut the night like a blade. The man stuck, the boxes falling from his hands, spreading his content on the floor in a disorganized cacophony of papers and plastic, curricula, fake badges, fragments of manipulated lives and exchanged as cards in a dirty game. And then, between the wreckage, a phone started ringing, a sharp and insistent sound that echoed by the garage. My heart leaps the melody. It was Lara's touch. The cautious expert took the device, his coated hands holding him like a precious relic. The screen illuminated, revealing a sequence of numbers that was a code and confession at the same time. The man, noticing the disadvantage, stepped back, his eyes looking for an escape route. The despair was stamped on his features, a panic mask that broke into the lantern's light. He turned on his heels, firing toward the side ladder, a fugitive shadow trying to escape the closing siege. But the police were ready. Coordinated, trained movements have transformed persecution into a precision ballet. The man did not arrive far away. He was intercepted on the second step, the sound of his fall stifling the screams of resistance. It was a spectacle that revealed the desperation of who knows that the game ended, that the cards were exposed and the hand is lost. Meanwhile, Lara's cell phone was still playing, a persistent reminder of what was at stake, what was at risk. The carrier's sign seemed to stop in time, a cruel irony that held us at that moment, the clock marking 22:10, as if the world refused to move forward. It was a frozen moment, a point of intersection between the past and the future, between fear and hope. With the detained man and the scene assured, the delegate Mora approached. Her dark features softened with a flash of empathy. "You did well," she said, her voice a safe anchorage amidst the storm of emotions. I nodded, gratitude by mixing with relief and renewed determination. Lara was out there somewhere, and that was just another step towards finding her. With man in custody, new questions arose, each one that promised to unveil an even more complex plot. The mystery was not resolved yet, but the way became clearer. Lara's courage, her ability to predict and plan, had brought us there, and now, with each track, with each discovery, I felt that the distance between us diminished. The night was far from over, but the promise of justice and reunion shone on the horizon. I was not alone, and as long as there was hope, as long as there was the willpower to continue, I knew Lara would be within my reach. Every beat of my heart, every step, was a tribute to its strength, and I was determined to bring my sister back. The suspect was caught 3 streets ahead, but his mouth remained sealed, a fortress of silence that challenged our patience. In his pocket, a keychain with the convenience store logo that had crashed at 10:10, a detail that now became a vital link in the runway that guided us. His cell phone, an old, worn out, was full of messages to disposable numbers, each text an invitation to quick and secretive meetings. In 10 minutes, always. In that maze of concrete and shadows, we find a cabinet in the parking lot, a small steel cave that kept more than secrets. Inside, a female, muddy, still damp backpack, as if the earth still grabbed its fabric in the hope of keeping it hidden. The content was a blow to the stomach, a Lara shirt, the same one she wore on the day of the interview, and a crushed ticket, wandered words in a hurry or despair. "If I don't come back, you don't look for me in the dark." The message was at the same time a warning and instruction, a warning cry that echoed in my mind, mingling with the cacophony of emotions that consumed me. We didn't find Lara that night, but her absence weighed like a constant presence, a shadow in every corner of my vision. The hours dragged on, and 22:10 became our hunting clock, a time that was repeated in our investigation as a figure, always leading to new fragments of the riddle. Delegate Mora, with renewed determination, decided to reopen disappearance files that crossed in that impossible minute. It was as if that time zone, were a portal to a parallel world where people simply dissolved in the air. Every 22:10 brought new parts, old photos, forgotten objects, fragments of lives that, like Lara's, had become mere records in yellowish papers over time. I saw myself immersed in a macabre dance, where pieces of a giant puzzle came to challenge my understanding. It was not just a search for Lara, but for all the unstructured stories, by all the suffocated screams that time kept. Her last SMS, that alert that had saved me, had become my guide and fuel. It was the only thing that pushed me, gave me strength when all I wanted was to succumb to despair. If I had lit the light that night, I would have turned one more number, a cold and impersonal statistics in some police report. But in the darkness, I found a way. And now, every 22:10, the world seemed to arrest his breath, awaiting the next revelation, the next thread of hope that could lead to the solution. The delegate and I worked tirelessly, following each track with the accuracy of a surgeon. There was something unsettling about that time, a standard that extended beyond Lara, an internal clock that marked the fate of many. It was as if an invisible force dictated the destinations, always converging to that fateful minute. Over the days, I realized that Lara was guiding me, even in the absence. Each clue, each new fragment, was like a map she had drawn before she disappeared, a trail I needed to follow. Her courage, sharp intelligence, were printed in every detail we found. The final question, the one that haunted me, was simple but meaningful. Would you light the light? It was a question that tested courage and faith. I knew the answer was no. Not now. Not after all I had learned. Darkness was no longer an enemy, but an ally, a cloak that allowed me to see beyond appearances, beyond fear. And so, the search for Lara continued, a journey that was not just mine, but of all those who had been swallowed by that treacherous watch. I would not rest until it was safe, until all the stories were told, and the mystery of 2210 was finally unraveled. The way was long and uncertain, but hope shone like a lone star in the vastness of the night. And as long as there was hope, I would continue to fight, guided by love and determination to bring Lara back home. Between light and noise, the world seemed suspended in a thin threshold, a space where reality intertwined with the unknown. The skill had confirmed what I already feared. Lara's video had been recorded in the dead of dawn, and the SMS that had saved me meticulously programmed. Lara, always methodical, had set a path of clues that now guided us like a trail of crumbs left behind, a wire of Ariadne in an uncertainty maze. The discovery of signs and deposits was not just an advance in the investigation. It was the revelation of an intricate network of lies and manipulations. Fake employment agencies operated under the facade of opportunities, but were actually disguised traps, networks thrown to capture those who, like my sister, sought a new beginning. With each piece we found, the image of the puzzle became clearer, and with it, the certainty that Lara knew more than any of us had imagined. The minute in which I did not light the light had become a corridor, a space between what it was and what could have been. In it, I walked, every step a breakthrough towards the truth that Lara had left behind. The questions, however, continued to haunt my mind, as shadows that danced on the outskirts of perception. What really happened at 10:10 p.m.? It was a ritual, a system failure, or something more sinister, something we didn't have a name for. I was stuck between these possibilities, each more disturbing than the previous one. Delegate Moura, always a solid presence by my side, also sought answers, but even her unshakable determination could not dissipate the fog of mystery that involved our efforts. Lara's network had discovered seemed to feed on standards, invisible rhythms that escaped to conventional logic. He was a predator on the lurking, waiting for that fateful minute to attack. As I reflected on these issues, an idea began to take shape in my mind, a hypothesis that, although scary, seemed to make sense. What if at 22:10 was more than a simple time? What if it were an opening, a temporal slit that somehow allowed those who knew their secret to manipulate reality to their advantage? The notion was both fascinating and terrifying, but could not be discarded. Lara had always believed that the truth was hidden in the details, and it was in this attention to the details that I deposited my faith. With each passing day, my determination grew, fed by the love of my sister and the desire to bring her back. The journey was long and arduous, but each discovery, however small, was a step in the right direction. Lara had left a map, and I was determined to follow it to the end. While writing in the blog comments he had created to gather information, he invited others to share his theories, collaborate in this collective effort to unravel the mystery. What do you think happens at 22:10? The question echoed on the screen, a call for all those who, like me, sought answers in the dark. It was an invitation to explore the unknown, to face whatever was lurking in that temporal slit. Each contribution was a piece of this puzzle, a possibility that brought us a little closer to the truth. While reading the answers, a sense of community emerged, an invisible bond that united us in the search for justice and understanding. Lara was out there somewhere, and I knew that together we could find her. The night advanced, and the clock continued its inexorable march towards 2210. But this time, I was prepared. With each pulse, each ICT tack, the certainty that it was not alone solidified. The love for Lara was the lighthouse that guided me, and the hope of seeing her again was the force that propelled me. Darkness was no longer an enemy, but an ally, a cloak I would use until you find the light. And so, between light and noise, I would continue to fight, guided by the determination of bringing my sister back home.